Hello and welcome to this short presentation of the wargame rules. I'm going to give a short overview of the rules in this first video, and then in the subsequent 9 videos I'll go through in more detail the different parts of the rules. Let's get on with it. First, the rules are on these 2 pages. And they are meant to be fairly simple, so that the player will be able to concentrate on fighting the game, fighting the war, and not as much thinking about the rules. The rules are divided into columns where I present the different aspects of the game. The first column is the ISR rules. This we'll discuss everything from your strategic assets, which high headquarters will supply to the brigade, all down to the brigade organic assets. Going on to the next one is fires. Again, we have strategic and operational fires, which includes air support, cyber, information, ballistic missiles, etc. And then we'll go all the way down to the brigade and battalion assets, being mortars, artillery and rockets, and EW, of course. Next column is protection. We're talking air defense, and in air defense is also counter UAS and also counter battery fire. Next segment is combat. Here we'll talk about how to move and how to conduct ourselves on the battlefield, the different units. Movement, as I just said, is discussed here. In the fourth column, we have the combat rules. It might look a little long and complicated, but it's fairly easy. It's all conducted with a dice, or a few of them. And lastly, in this column, we're talking about concealment and camouflage. On the other side, we start out with engineer works, all the classics, minefields, breaching minefields, bridges, crossing and destroying them, and then ending up with fortifications. We have logistics rules. Those I will not get into depth in, as we have not played these rules yet. And we have the command and control rules. These often applies to effects or what happens if headquarters are taken out during the game. Good. Let's start out with some of the important parts, the different markers on the game. And they are discussed down here. This is a standard game marker. This one is 1st Company, 2nd Battalion in a heavy brigade. And this is the first line on all units. Describe where do they belong. And this is only important when you set up and when you do your task orging. The next piece of the marker describes what kind of unit this is. This is an armored infantry company. This is the standard NATO signatures, and they're used throughout the game. Then we have 4 numbers discussing the characteristics of the particular unit. So the first number is the attack multiplier. We use this when the unit is in the offensive, and this describes the power it has from the weapon systems. In this case, it's an armored infantry company. It's got a 35mm cannon on it, and therefore it will have a +1 multiplier when he's rolling a dice for each platoon. The next one is the weapons range, and it states 1, which means that the marker has to be can only shoot at a target which is in a neighboring hex. So the 1 means you can shoot, the neighboring hex. Tanks, which have a longer range on their guns, have a range of 2. Artillery, mortars, and so on, of course, have longer ranges also. I do acknowledge that a 35mm cannon is able to fire for longer, but since the maps do not take terrain and so on into consideration, the general range of all weapons have been shorted, especially direct fire weapons has been shorted due to the different terrains. The next one, the third number, is the armor multiplier. It kind of describes what kind of armor does this unit have, and we use this when the unit is in the defense. In this case, it's an armored infantry company riding around in CV-90, armored infantry fighting vehicles. It's armored, and therefore, whenever it's defending, it will have a +1 modifier on the dice. The fourth number is the movement point. It's a tracked vehicle, therefore it has 5 movement points. And you can see over here in the terrain effects sketch over here how many movement points you use when you move through different terrain. So when you are in the open terrain, fields and so on, you use 2 movement points per kilometer. When you move on road, you use 1 movement point per kilometer. In woods, 3 movement points per kilometer or per hex. Build-up areas, since you use the roads, that's 1 movement point per kilometer, and it takes a movement point to get in and out of fortified positions. So that was the unit marker described, and being able to read that is important in this game. So another side, on the other side of the movement marker, you'll see that the same icons are on, the same numbers are on, but it has a gray marker going through it. And that's because all markers in general are companies. And a company has 3 platoons. Every time you fight and you take casualties, you lose 1 platoon. And therefore, when you fight one marker, you'll always throw 3 dice because you have 3 platoons engaged. So when you lose 1 platoon, you put the marker upside down, you turn it upside down, and the gray bar will emerge. And the gray bar describes that you have now lost 1 platoon. Should you lose further 1 platoon, you will roll a die, and if you roll a 5 and above, 5 or 6, the unit will remain on the battlefield, and you'll put a 1 left marker on top of it. If you roll less than 5, then the morale of the unit is so low that the 3rd platoon, the surviving platoon, leaves the battlefield, and the company is lost. Okay, that was the unit marker. We'll go more into details about fighting and taking losses when going through the combat rules. We have a thing called a 7-hex cluster. We use that especially when we employ our UAVs. A 7-hex cluster is a cluster of hexes with a middle one and then the adjacent 6 hexes going around it, and that's in general the area a UAV can search and or look in with its sensors. We also have 3 other markers indicating different effects: info effect, EW effect, and cyber effect. We'll discuss those in detail when we come to that specific part of fires on a subsequent video.